The CEO smirked, swirling his wine glass as if mocking the air. Play Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu, and my daughter is yours. A ripple of laughter swept across the room, but the black janitor simply walked toward the piano, his eyes locked on the man who tried to humiliate him. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. The golden chandelier bathed the entire ballroom in warm light, but the air was cold with judgment. Dozens of guests in tuxedos and glittering gowns turned their heads toward the man in the worn navy blue janitor's uniform. Some smirked, others whispered behind manicured hands. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He had been called in earlier that evening to clean up after the charity gala, nothing more. But then the CEO, a man who owned half the city's luxury hotels, spotted him near the stage. And for reasons only rooted in arrogance, he decided to make him the evening's entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO announced, raising his glass, we have a special guest tonight. Our very own janitor here claims he loves music. Well, let's see if he can handle real music. Gasps, chuckles, and the faint click of camera phones followed. The janitor stood still, his dark eyes fixed on the older man, the crowd's amusement reflecting in the polished marble floor beneath his boots. The CEO gestured toward the grand piano, its glossy black frame glowing under the spotlight. Play Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu. Perfectly. And if you do, I'll let you marry my daughter. His voice dripped with mockery, as if he were offering something utterly impossible. Some guests covered their mouths to hide their laughter. Others leaned forward, eager to see the humiliation unfold. But instead of shrinking back, the janitor stepped forward, his hands calm at his sides. His pace was steady, almost unnerving, as he approached the piano. The laughter softened, curiosity slipping into the cracks of the room's smug energy. The CEO's daughter, seated near the front, looked uncomfortable. She glanced between her father and the janitor, her pale hands clasped tightly in her lap. When the janitor reached the piano, he didn't sit immediately. He ran his fingers lightly across the smooth surface, as if greeting an old friend. His gaze never left the CEO's face. And in that moment, the entire room began to feel the shift, the unease of realizing that the man they thought would be humiliated might just have the last word. The soft hum of conversation died completely as the janitor lowered himself onto the piano bench. The ivory keys gleamed under the spotlight, waiting. His fingers hovered above them, steady, not trembling like the crowd expected. From the far side of the room, a man in a navy suit whispered, "Does he even know which key is middle C?" It drew a few quiet laughs, but no one dared to speak louder now, something in the janitor's presence demanded silence. The CEO leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, wearing the same smug expression. "Go on," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Show us what you've got." The janitor tilted his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the guests. He caught sight of two older women frowning, perhaps sensing the cruelty in the challenge. His eyes softened for a second, then returned to the piano. He pressed a single key. The note rang out, sharp and clear, cutting through the tension. Then another. And another. Each sound was deliberate, as though he were testing the waters. The CEO chuckled, shaking his head. "I knew it," he said to the man beside him. "He's stalling." But the janitor didn't look up. His hands began to move, slowly at first, then faster, weaving into the unmistakable opening of Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu. Gasps rippled across the audience. Some turned to each other with wide eyes, while others leaned forward, entranced. The melody poured out with precision and emotion, his fingers dancing effortlessly. Years of practice, hidden away from the public eye, now filled the grand hall. The janitor's back was straight, his breathing calm, every movement filled with quiet confidence. By the second movement, the CEO's smirk had faded slightly. He shifted in his chair, his wine glass now untouched on the table. His daughter sat frozen, her lips parted in astonishment. The music swelled, the notes cascading like a waterfall, commanding every ear in the room. Even the servers paused mid-step, holding trays in place so as not to disturb the performance. In the corner, a young boy whispered to his mother, "He plays better than the man we saw last week at the concert." His mother nodded without taking her eyes off the pianist. As the piece neared its most challenging run, the janitor's gaze flicked briefly to the CEO, not out of fear, but with a quiet, unspoken message, "You thought this was a joke. Now watch me finish it." The CEO's jaw tightened as the janitor's fingers flew over the keys. Every note was perfect, too perfect. The challenge had been meant as a public insult, a spectacle to remind everyone of their place. Instead, the janitor was turning it into something else entirely, a performance that no one could look away from. By the time the final arpeggio of the middle section rang out, the room was dead silent. The only sound was the steady rhythm of his playing and the faint hum of the chandelier above. A man near the bar whispered, This is better than the recordings." The CEO leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Enough," he said sharply. But the janitor didn't stop. If anything, his hands moved with more determination, the intricate notes flowing faster, like he was pouring out every insult, every locked door, every side glance he'd ever endured. The CEO's voice rose. "I said enough." This time, the words sliced through the hall, drawing startled glances from the guests. The janitor's eyes flicked up for a fraction of a second, meeting the CEO's. Then, without breaking the tempo, he finished the entire phrase, as if to say, "You don't decide my ending." Several guests exchanged glances. The tension wasn't just about music anymore, it was about a line that had been crossed, and everyone knew it. The CEO stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. "Do you think you're proving something?" he demanded. "You're here to clean floors, not what?" The janitor's voice cut in, low but steady. His fingers still moved across the keys, threading his words through the melody. "Not show you what you've never taken the time to see?" A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. No one interrupted. The CEO's daughter stood up slowly, her eyes fixed on the man at the piano. "Father, let him finish." The CEO froze. For a moment, it looked as if he might argue, but the murmurs from the guests pressed in. The room wasn't on his side anymore. The janitor played the final run with a flourish, his head lifting at the last note. The sound lingered in the air like a challenge left unanswered. No one clapped, not yet. It was as if the whole room was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments, I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. For a long second, the only movement in the room was the faint sway of the chandelier's crystals. Then, someone in the back, an older man with silver hair, began to clap. Slowly at first, as though testing the waters. It was followed by another, and then another, until the sound swelled into a wave of applause. Guests stood to their feet, the velvet chairs sliding back against the marble floor. The CEO's lips pressed into a thin line. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The challenge had been a joke, a reminder of status, not a coronation. The janitor stood, bowing his head slightly, but his eyes stayed locked on the man who had tried to humiliate him. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The crowd's reaction said everything. The CEO's daughter stepped forward, her voice clear in the quiet that followed. "That was the most beautiful performance I've ever heard." Her father's head snapped toward her. "Sit down," he ordered, his voice tight. But she didn't. Instead, she walked closer to the piano, stopping just beside the janitor. "You didn't tell them," she said softly, so that only those nearest could hear. The janitor glanced at her, a hint of warmth in his otherwise steady gaze. "It wasn't my place," he replied. "What's going on?" someone asked from the crowd. The curiosity was too strong to contain now. The CEO's daughter turned to face the room. He's not just a janitor. He's a conservatory-trained pianist. He played in competitions before my father's company bought the theater, and shut it down. Gasps broke out across the audience. Head swiveled toward the CEO, whose face flushed a deep red. That's not relevant, he snapped, but the words felt weaker now. It's relevant when you humiliate someone in front of everyone, an older woman near the front said sharply. Especially someone you've already wronged. The murmurs grew louder, like a tide pulling against the CEO's authority. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, but the applause had turned to quiet judgment. The janitor stepped away from the piano, each footstep deliberate. You wanted to make a point tonight, he said, his voice even. I think you did, just not the one you planned. The ballroom's doors opened quietly at the far end, and in walked 3 people in dark suits. They weren't guests, their measured steps and clipped expressions made that clear. One of them, a tall black man with a badge clipped to his belt, scanned the room and headed straight for the CEO. Mr. Hollister, he said evenly, we need a word. Now. The CEO's shoulders stiffened. I'm in the middle of a private event, he muttered, glancing nervously at the guests who were now hanging on every word. This won't wait, the man replied. His tone wasn't aggressive, but it carried authority, the kind that left no room for negotiation. The janitor stood still by the piano, watching. He didn't move closer, didn't speak, but the CEO could feel his presence like a weight pressing in. Is this about the theater case? Someone whispered from the crowd. The words spread quickly, murmurs turning into sharp questions. The woman in the suit stepped forward, flipping open a folder. We've received multiple complaints, Mr. Hollister. Tonight's incident has added to the evidence of discriminatory conduct within your organization. The CEO's face darkened. This is absurd. It's not absurd when you try to humiliate an employee based on race in front of 50 witnesses, the tall man said firmly. Especially one who was already targeted when you shut down his career years ago. The CEO's gaze darted toward his daughter, who stood beside the janitor. She didn't flinch. You've made this political, he growled. No, she replied calmly. You made it personal. Gasps and murmurs rippled again through the guests. Some had their phones out now, recording every moment. Others were already typing furiously, the kind of instant coverage that would be online before the night was over. The CEO's jaw clenched, his voice low. We can discuss this in my office. The tall man shook his head. We'll discuss it downtown. And I suggest you come quietly, the optics are already bad enough. For the first time all evening, the CEO seemed to shrink. His shoulders sagged slightly, his gaze falling to the floor before he turned toward the door. The janitor didn't smile. He simply stepped aside, allowing the man to walk past, the applause from earlier replaced by a heavy, judgmental silence. The next morning, headlines spread across every major news outlet. CEO faces discrimination investigation after gala incident, viral video shows public humiliation of black employee, clips of the performance and confrontation flooded social media. The video was impossible to ignore, the smirk, the challenge, the flawless Chopin, and the crowd's shifting loyalties all captured in crystal clarity. At the center of it all was the janitor, whose name now trended alongside words like justice and respect. Inside a downtown conference room, the CEO sat flanked by his attorneys. Across from him, the investigator from the night before reviewed statements from guests, employees, and former staff. Each page seemed heavier than the last. This isn't about one incident, the investigator said, sliding a stack of documents across the table. It's about a pattern. You've used your position to demean and intimidate employees based on race. Last night, you did it in front of cameras. The CEO's lawyers shifted uncomfortably. One leaned in and whispered, we need to settle this, now. Back at the hotel, the janitor went about his usual duties. He replaced light bulbs, polished brass railings, and mopped the lobby floor. Guests who recognized him stopped to shake his hand, some offering words of thanks, others just smiling as if they'd witnessed something rare. By afternoon, the hotel manager approached him. "Corporate has reached out," she said cautiously. "There's an offer on the table." The janitor looked up from the mop bucket. "What kind of offer?" "They're reinstating your position as a concert pianist at the company's theater, fully funded, full schedule." And, she hesitated. "They want to issue a public apology." He didn't respond immediately. His hands rested on the mop handle, his thoughts turning to the years he'd spent cleaning floors instead of playing music. Finally, he asked, "Is that his idea, or the board's?" "The board's," she admitted. That evening, in front of the same ballroom crowd, now doubled in size with press and cameras, the CEO stepped up to a podium. His voice was stiff but clear. "I publicly apologize for my actions last night, and for the years of harm caused to Mr. Carter. Effective immediately, he will return as lead pianist at our concert hall." The applause was instant and thunderous. And this time, it wasn't out of politeness, it was out of respect. The ballroom was nearly empty now, the buzz of media and flashing cameras replaced by the soft hum of staff clearing tables. Outside, the city lights reflected off the glass walls, casting shimmering patterns across the polished floor. The janitor, no, the pianist, sat alone at the grand piano. His hands rested lightly on the keys, not to perform for an audience this time, but for himself. He played softly, the notes drifting through the empty hall like a private conversation. This wasn't Chopin, nor any other composer's work. It was his own, a quiet, improvised melody that carried years of struggle, resilience, and pride. Halfway through, he heard footsteps. The CEO's daughter appeared in the doorway, no press, no crowd, just her. She didn't speak at first. She simply walked over and stood beside the piano, listening. "That's beautiful," she finally said. He looked up at her and smiled faintly. "It's not for the papers. Just for me." She nodded. "I think, last night changed more than you realize." "My father," she paused. "Well, he's stubborn. But he's not untouchable anymore. People saw that." The pianist glanced down at the keys. "It was never about making him untouchable. It was about making sure no one else feels that small in a room full of people." They stayed in silence for a moment, letting the music fill the gap. From across the hall, the hotel manager called out, "They're ready for you, Mr. Carter. The stage is yours for tomorrow's concert." He closed the piano gently, the soft click echoing in the stillness. Standing, he straightened his jacket and picked up the sheet music he had kept folded in his pocket for years, worn, creased, but never thrown away. As he walked toward the exit, he paused at the spot where he had first stood the night before, when the challenge was thrown at him. The laughter, the stares, the humiliation, all replaced now by something far stronger. Outside, the night air was cool. A few people recognized him and offered a nod or a quiet "congratulations." He didn't need more. Respect had been earned, justice had been served, and for the first time in years, the music was truly his again. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.